Okay.
Welcome to Baseball and Coffee, episode 53 with Tino and Aaron. What's up, Aaron?
Usual. Nice to be recording on a Saturday with no work on the horizon.
For sure. For sure. You got any coffee with you right now? You drinking any coffee?
No, I've had 2 cups today already. I'll be looking forward to a third cup here shortly. But yeah, we took a walk down to a local shop's actually less than a half mile from our front door. It's
Mhm.
called Passenger Coffee. It's a really small artisan roastery, and we went down there today and got a cup. Had to sit outside, and it was like kind of snow spitting because they only have 3 seats inside.
Yeah.
The shop it's the main roaster area, so they have 3 roasters in the back, and they just have a small counter out front. There's not that much seating space, so we sat outside and watched the snowflakes. And I had a single origin Ethiopia that was not sun dried. It was really fantastic,
Nice.
really
Washed.
really good.
So it's washed.
Yep, yeah.
That's what I'm drinking right now, more of the washed Ethiopia. Um, so I should say for this episode, we're doing our first base rankings, top 16 redraft format. We will sprinkle in a little dynasty as well. We'll see how far past 7 or 8 we get. I'm sure we'll get to 16, but it's a little dirty. I don't have any real coffee news other than I'm drinking a really beautiful Ethiopia right now, but I am making ramen from scratch, which is something that I like to do on occasion, and it's kind of a labor of love, and I'm really enjoying it. It's I'll just do the quick and dirty version is big stock pot with dried kombu that you rinse, and then you simmer for 10 minutes, and then dried shiitake mushrooms for about a half hour. It gives it a ton of umami. Remove those and kind of keep those for later to saute as a garnish. And then roasted pork bones and chicken thighs go in the broth for a good couple of hours. Then add a bunch of vegetables and some bacon. Then you take it all out, and that simmers for, I don't know, probably grand total of 5 hours or so. Take it all out, push it all through a cheesecloth, and you've got a really beautiful, almost like a consomme, and then tons of garnishes, tofu, corn, alfalfa sprouts. I am doing a pork belly for this one, which is kind of special, cured overnight. But one of my favorite meals and a labor of love, and I think falls in the category of coffee nerddom, in that there's so many details, and that's the fun part for me is it's wrapped up in all the details and all the craziness of it. So here's to a little bit of ramen later. I am a little bit under the weather too, so the ramen will certainly help that. All right, man. So first base rankings. I'm so buried in baseball and thinking about baseball while at work and while on my way to work. And it's kind of, we're at that for me, that peak point of the off season where it's kind of all you can think about and your head is swimming in numbers. But I'm excited to get through catcher, first base, and second base, because that's when the real kind of fun begins. Catcher, first, and second is a little rough. Let's start. Let's start with your first tier. How many first basemen do you have in that first tier?
2. And I just want to add before we dive into the tiers,
Mm-hmm.
that what I found is I had a very clear top 6.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I tried to break down the tiers after that, and there were 2 tiers in that top 6 for me, very clearly based on value. Uh, the next WOD was just almost imperceptible. So I only have 3 tiers,
Mm-hmm.
but that third tier is very large because the
Mm-hmm.
values are just so close.
Sure.
Yeah, first tier for me was just 2 players.
I have 5 tiers, but I'll explain a little bit of the reason why. I actually have 7 in the first 2. I've got 4 in my first and 3 in the second. But what's interesting is I think in some ways I've clumped players of similar style and characteristic together in the bottom 3 tiers. And I think a lot of it is based on what I value in a first baseman. And so what I value most is that first clump. But to your point, I think from an overall value standpoint, the bottom half of first baseman is pretty rough, pretty rough.
I don't know that. I mean, as there are some players in there that I don't have personal preference for, but I think what it reinforced to me was there's a lot of depth at the position, and
Sure.
while there may be players that their profiles don't gravitate to you, there's guys that are more average, there's guys that are more on base, there's guys that have a lot of playing time on decent
Hmm.
teams, there's guys that are
Hmm.
more have a lot of power,
Hmm.
and their values kind of wash out in terms of their total accumulated power, but or their value, pardon me. But it's not, yeah, it's like no standouts, but just a lot to choose from in different areas.
I agree. I think it's the key to first base for me, if you're not getting one of the top two tiers, is understanding the makeup of your team, or what is going to be the makeup of your team well enough to supplement with the right type of player, right? If you're going low average, big power, but you already have big low average and big power on your team, you're not balancing your team in the way that maybe you should. Whereas if you don't need power, but you need on base, you need on, RBI potential, you need hits and average, a Josh Bell or a Ty France might be the type of player that that you prefer, but it's understanding what the need is. But to your point, I think all the way up to about 16, I do think that there are enough first basemen available to not be a sinkhole. You just have to figure out the right one, the right fit. With that, though, I do think that there are a few studs. Let's start with your number one.
It's Freddie Freeman for me.
Okay. Mine is Vladimir Guerrero Jr. Let's debate this a little bit. What is it? Why is Freeman your number one?
I mean, it's a splitting hair situation. I have them both as $47 players, so they're basically identical.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think, and so I just as for this exercise, I thought which one would I want to start a team with, and I would start with Freeman. So I just had to be the honest and put him first. But I
Sure.
don't think trying to choose between these two is really tough. The tiebreakers for me was Freeman's launch angle is ideal. Um, Freeman is a little bit faster on the base pass, although Vlad did steal a few bases last year, which surprised me.
Mm-hmm.
But that kind of came out of nowhere, whereas Freeman has a track record of being a good base runner and getting the most out of his limited athleticism.
Mm-hmm.
They both play on really good offenses and both should accumulate a ton of counting stats. But I just for me, Freeman's has a little bit longer track record, a little less probably top end power. But I do like his ability to get the most out of his power, given that he's really dialed in with that launch angle and his ability to drive the ball. Um, so it's really really tight. Like I said, they're my top two in their own tier on their own and pretty much identical in terms of value.
Sure. Uh, it's funny because I think so. I roster Freddie Freeman in our home league. I think the interesting part, and he is my number two. The interesting part about comparing the two for me, and I went through a similar exercise where I wanted to understand um kind of where I sat with both of them, but I think it's very indicative of our two approaches in this particular conversation, because I think um Freeman's probably the right choice, to be honest with you. He's has the history, he has the history of hitting for average, the history of scoring runs, driving runs in, stealing a pretty elite amount of bases for a first baseman, right? I think you can almost count on a 390 OBP from him and close to a 900 OPS. I just think Guerrero has a, you know, 1,100 OPS year in him, and it's not that far away. When I looked at his stat line from last year, I saw pretty incredible stats with him essentially struggling all year long. You alluded to the 4.3-degree launch angle, right? He had a
Yeah,
52.1% ground ball rate. He
right.
hit the ball on the ground more than half of the time, and he still hit 32 home runs, right? He still drove in 97 runs. He doesn't strike out at a rate that is alarming at all, right? He's way below average at 16.4%. He does chase a bit, but I think it's just like his father, right?
Yeah.
Um, So I would want to gamble on that talent. I think as time goes on, I'm gravitating more and more towards just pure talent, knowing that you may have a couple of players on your team that you're counting on who don't produce up to their ability, and you have to compensate quickly for those players, right? But my bet would be on talent with Vladimir Guerrero if we're doing these ranks just as an isolated thing, right? Now,
Hmm.
if my team was if it, like my current team in our home league, Freeman's probably the better fit because I need something I can count on at first base, right? I don't need the upside that Guerrero would provide in order to compete. I just need someone who's going to give me consistency. And so I think Freeman is the right choice for me in that particular league. But if we're grading just isolated first baseman, who's your number one first baseman? I want the talent of Vladimir Guerrero. I think he's got a 300, 425, 650, even 700 season in him. And I could see 110 runs and 130 RBIs from him. I think, and he's 23 years old. I think we should mention the fact that he is incredibly young still, and I think he's 3 years away from his peak. Anything else to add on those two? So that's your first tier, and you don't have anybody else in that tier, huh?
I don't know. It's an $11 drop down to my next first baseman, so they were clearly in their own tier.
Sure. So I do have Pete Alonso and Paul Goldschmidt in the same tier. Um, I have Alonso 3 and Goldschmidt 4. For me, I don't think Goldschmidt is going to repeat what he did in 22. He hit 317, 404, 981. He had 106 runs, 35 home runs, and 115 RBIs, right? That's a hell of a season. I do think he's ran high BABIPs in the past. His BABIP last year was 368, which is, I think, a touch high. I think we can expect a little bit of regression, but even with regression, it brings him down to about 300 as a hitter. I love the 12.1% walk rate. Interesting with him that I didn't realize was he runs some pretty low zone contact rates. So his zone contact rate last year was 81.8 percent, which is low for an elite player. And I think that's what helped lead to his 21.7% K rate. So for me, moving forward with Goldschmidt as he ages, I think we can expect to see even less contact in the zone and his K rates start to rise a little bit. So that'll probably zap his average a bit. I see him as a high 20s home run player, probably with maybe 90 runs and 100 RBIs as opposed to the season he had last year. But that, to me, that's still number 4. And that's really not too far away from what I expect from Freddie Freeman next year. Right. And then Alonso is just, I have to admit, I'm not a huge Pete Alonso fan. And I think it's more of a stylistic thing, just as a fan, not even talking fantasy. I don't like the Mets. I don't like that type of player typically, but you can't ignore 40 home runs and 131 RBIs on a team where I think that offense is going to be very, very, very good next year. He also, as a power player, doesn't have a ton of warts, right? He does have a 36% O swing, so he chases a ton, but his strikeout rate is only 18.7%. So I think Alonso, you will probably see another 40 home run, 120, 115, 120 RBI season from him. That's why he's my number 3. I just prefer a more well-rounded player, which is part of why Freeman's above him. But if someone made the case to me that Alonso above Freeman, I would be willing to listen. So what's your second tier? That's 4 players, right? In your second tier?
Yeah, 4 players in the second tier. So can I ask real quick? So last year we had a pretty engaging dialogue around Matt Olson's presence in this
Sure.
tier. I'm
Sure.
surprised that not to hear his name. What changed with him that he didn't make that tier for you?
K rate, contact rate,
Okay.
swinging strike rate. I think those 3 things are the big ones. I still, in some ways, he's kind of a poor man's Alonso, right? I think he's a left-handed poor man's Alonso. He's going to put up, 30 to 40 home runs, maybe even more. He's going to drive in a ton of runs in that Braves offense. He plays every day, and I do like the double-digit walk rate as well, but he struck out 24.3% of the time. So he struck out essentially 1 out of every 4 plate appearances, and his zone contact was sub 80%. And
Yeah.
I can't get behind that, at least right now. If he solves that a little bit as he did in Oakland, I would really be happy to elevate him above where I have him. I actually have him at 6. But as of right now, I was kind of high man on Olsen last year. And I just think that going into last year, and I just think that he's not, last year was not the type of season that I expected from him. I do wonder, maybe there was a year of adjustment. He went from Oakland to Atlanta. He was going home. He may have been pressing. If that's the case, right, we might see him go right back to his 21 numbers. In 2021 in Oakland, he was 271, 371, 911 with 101 runs, 39 homers, and 111 RBIs, right? Which is basically, what is that? That's Goldschmidt last year with a little less average. So yes, I believe in Matt Olson. Yes. Can you win a championship with Matt Olson? For sure. I do think last year was probably his floor for the next couple of years.
Yeah.
But that's my answer to the Matt Olson question is he did not do what I thought he would do based on 2021, but he is still a near elite first base starter in fantasy this year.
Yeah.
For me.
Very detailed answer. Thank you. So my second tier goes Goldschmidt, Alonso Olsen, and then Jose Abreu for the Astros. In that order. I appreciate you detailing Alonso. I thought it was really interesting looking at Alonso and Olsen side by side because they come out as very, very close in value. Alonso's a little bit ahead just because of his projected batting average. However, as you detailed, Alonso swings a little bit less, swings and misses a little bit less. He chases a little bit more, whereas Olsen has more swing and miss, more swinging strike, but he chases less. And so he actually, for me, he has the best projected walk rate of this second tier. So a little bit more on base, and he actually outperforms Olsen, in the barrel and hard hit. But their projected OPSs and ISOs are literally percentage, like a couple points apart. So it's pretty interesting just to have two really power heavy first basemen who hit on opposite sides of the plate in the same division, just slightly different plate profiles. Like you, I think if I would want Olsen, I think, of the two. I like, yeah. If I was starting my own team or had the choice, I like Atlanta's offense a little bit better. Like you, I think second year in Atlanta, there might be some stabilization, and I do like a little bit more the ceiling on his raw power and barrel rates and the walk rates in the middle of that lineup as well. So I think that's always a little bit more stable. And then Abreu at 6. I can't remember if we've talked about Abreu on the pod this offseason or not. He's kind of been one of my offseason crushes since he made the move from Chicago to Houston. Been trying to acquire him in my home league, in our home league, unsuccessfully. Definitely has the least amount of power in this group, a lower launch angle. However, his zone contact and his hard hit rate are still very, very good. And I'm just really enamored with what he might do as a cleanup hitter, in that park on that team. So he comes out of us as my number 6 and my last one in the second tier.
How do you think the move from Chicago to Houston will change Abreu's fantasy standing? What does it do to his numbers for you?
I think it's rising tide raises all boats, right? So I think just being in a lineup where, when I watch Houston, when I watch their games, like everyone just takes good at bats. They're constantly putting pressure on the opposing team and the opposing pitcher. They're constantly putting balls in play. They don't strike out. And as we talked about, his ability, his time on this was the clutch hit, his ability to go off fields. his ability to get extra base hits, and I just think all of those things are going to really elevate what he already does well to impact in a fantasy sense. I don't expect some huge transformation of who he is as a player, that they're going to unlock something in him. It's just more, I see his skill set in that environment and with those players around him. I just think from his fantasy standpoint, he has opportunity to kind of go up a level. Um, so I know that Chicago is a good place to hit. I don't think necessarily about the Cropper box or anything like that. I
Right.
think he certainly has the back control to, you know, hit for more than 20 homers. I have him for 21 home runs, which is, I think, pretty realistic
Mm-hmm.
goal. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think he's the last one in the group. He's not as good as the one above. I would make the argument I want him over the other guys, but I think he's has a potential to be a really great asset this year.
Does it concern you that he's 35?
Not really, just because I didn't see anything in the underlying stats last year to suggest that there's a skills decline.
Okay.
But we don't always see that coming, right? But I didn't see anything from a swinging strike rate or a hard contact standpoint or a
Mm-hmm.
launch angle change that gave me a sense of his skills are starting to erode.
Sure. So this is his age 36 year. I have him at 7 and at the bottom of this tier. I have him there because I think, we had the infamous discussion about his RBIs last year and kind of the consistency of his RBIs. And of course, last year he had 75 RBIs instead of the 100 that I expected. I have him at 7 because I expect that RBI total to increase quite a bit. To your point, I think the hitters in front of him are much better and they take better at bats. I do worry about declining skill set just because of age. I think that, this is going to be his age 36 season. And that does make me nervous. I understand science and diet and whatnot, keeps players playing longer. He's not a player that I would want to roster right now. I think that there are other options below this tier that can provide similar value without the risk of falling off a cliff, which at 36 years old, I think can happen. I also worry about his ability to get the ball in the air. And I know he's not a home run hitter, but I think there was a point last year, I'm looking up his month-to-month stats. There was a point last year where he was just hitting the ball into the ground and then popping up. And, some of those things do worry me. So let me see here. I just pulled up the splits. So in March, April, he hit 217, 308, 656. And then from that point forward, he didn't have an OPS below 700, but he started off really, really slow. Anyways, I do have him at 7. I do believe in Jose Abreu. I think that he will provide a very probably a consistent output. He, is like Freeman in some ways statistically without the steals, but probably a couple of notches below. At 5, so here's the difference between our first and second tiers. At 5, I have Vinny Pasquantino. I'm a believer. I have him above Matt Olson, even in a redraft. I don't, we had a conversation on the catcher pod about the Royals team context. I do think the Royals offense is going to be pretty good, at least a portion of that offense. And Pasquantino's underlying stat, well, his on paper stats, but also his underlying stats are really undeniable. He hit 295, 383, 832 in 298 at bats, so essentially a half a season. 306 BABIP, so nothing alarming there at all. Either way, 11.7% walk rate and 11.4% K rate. So he walked more than he struck out. He didn't chase, 28.9% chase rate. Zone contact was 92%. I would almost prefer that to be lower so that he could make more quality contact. It's as if, he's literally hits anything he swings at. Swinging strike rate was 6.6% last year, which is incredibly low for a power player. Max EV, average EV were 91.2 and almost 113. Launch angle 12.1 degrees, in line with what we want. I just think everything is there. And his ground ball fly ball is pretty much 1-to-1. So everything there says to me, power player who takes a walk, who has elite hand-eye coordination, right? And that to me is a profile that I'm willing to bet on. I would rather have that than Olsen at this point in time, because I think that I don't think Pasquantino has any holes. Now I'm betting that he does have 600 plate appearances and doesn't ever come out of the lineup. I'm betting that the Royals as an offense continue to grow, that Melendez and Witt and Salvador Perez and some of their other players continue to ascend, right? Those are all bets that I'm willing to make. So for me, Vinny Pasquantino is at the top of tier 2 and my number 5 first baseman, with Olsen 6 and Abreu 7. Where do you have Pasquantino in your overall ranks?
I'm in the middle of my next tier, so like around 11, 12, 13.
And is that mostly just because he hasn't done it yet, or did you see something that was of concern in his profile for you?
Yeah, I have him projected for 17 home runs, so at the position that's kind of in the middle there, with a lot of other guys who have good plate skills and hit for around 20 home runs. So
I think his plate skills, though, I guess the counter for me is his plate skills are unique at this position. I think that they are a notch above any of the other players who, for me, when I look, I see, the 20-ish home runs. I see Ty France, I see Josh Bell, I put Nathaniel Lowe in that category. I put Abreu in that category. I even put Freeman in that category, right? I think that there are some things about his profile that say Freddie Freeman to me, in that they have just incredible coordination and incredible bat to ball, and they're strong, right? They can hit the ball out. It's not a slap hitter, but they have some of the slap hitter coordination. So again, this is a gamble for me putting him at 5. I understand that, but I see a top 5 first baseman moving forward with him. He's also 24. And so I think that we can bet that he's going to continue to get better as time wears on. So those are my top 7. You've done your top 6. Let's get started with the next tier before we take a break. Who's the top of your next tier?
Real quick. So looking at Pasquantino, there was a cluster of 5 first basemen who are right around him in OPS and WOBA, projected WOBA. Of course, this is all projections, but
sure.
So like Vinny was 787, 341, and these are OPS and WOBA. And then Yandy Diaz, 778, 344, Josh Bell, 782, 342. Rowdy Tellez, 805, 344, and then Rhys Hoskins, 793, 345. I'm not saying I want any of those players over him. I'm trying to comp those, but that's what I say when I saw him, like in a similar type plate on base OPS area as a lot of other players.
Sure.
And then I thought it was, go ahead. I was gonna say, before we move on too, I thought it'd be interesting to have a quick, he's not in my top 16, and I doubt very seriously he's in your top 16.
Yeah.
But I wanted to touch on Luis Arraez real fast.
Yeah.
Because I think he's a really interesting just player to talk about real fast, because he's not necessarily just because he's in the news, but so when I initially did my sheet, he was my number 7 first baseman, because they were the projection systems had him for over 600 plate appearances. He's never been healthy enough. He did that last year for the first time. So when I put him down, when I adjusted his plate appearances and at bats to what his career norms have been, he dropped all the way down, well out of the top 20. But he was up there because of his batting average and his hits.
Sure.
Right. And so he had so much value in that particular category, it jumps his valuation way up. So anyway, now that I adjusted that down to his career norms, he's nowhere in the discussion. I don't think I would have ranked him there even before that, but it's just an interesting, I think, discussion from, we do value OPS and things like that. But when you have someone who has such a impact on one particular category, especially at a position like first base, where you're looking for home runs, you're looking for RBIs, and I think it's a moot point. He's going to play second this year for the Marlins, but I
Which
just didn't
makes
know
me
if
feel
you had,
valuable.
yeah. So anyway, it was just interesting. I was like, wow, he dropped way down there.
Sure.
And then to see also how much weight his batting average carried before you adjust those plate appearance projections, it was really interesting to me. So I don't know if you had any thoughts about that before we move on.
I do. I wouldn't touch him at first base. And the reason why is so last year, I think we all saw him as a very good offensive player, right? He fetched a middle of rotation starter and two decent prospects, one very good prospect and one 17-year-old who could be a very good prospect, right? So obviously the value was there, Major League Baseball wise, with the rise. Respected, right? Leader, all those things. I'm sorry, he had 8 home runs. He had 49 RBIs out of the first base spot, and he didn't provide speed. He had 4 steals. So what I see there is I could give a shit what how many runs he scored and what his average was. What I see is 3 categories that I now have to 2 categories. I won't count steals at first, but 2 categories, the 2 main categories for me at first base that I now have to compensate for because I have a rise. Now, and that's at any position, right? It could be first base, but it could also be at utility. It could also be at corner. It also could even at second base, to take an 8 home run, 49 RBI guy and slot him in there as a regular is way. I would much rather have fewer hits, slightly fewer runs, but something very, very standard across the board, and then find another better player at a different position to compensate for the fact that he's not a great player. To me, he is a much more valuable real life player than a fantasy player. I've rostered him in the past. He's almost like a substitute that you could slot in when someone gets hurt, knowing you could boost a couple of categories and then pull him back because you're not getting any. Right. So last year or 2 years ago, in 479 at bats, he had 2 home runs, 58 runs, 42 RBIs, and 2 steals. To me, he's a 1 category player, maybe a 2 category player if you think the runs are for real. Even at second base, I don't really know where he's going to slot in. My guess is pretty darn low. No, I think he is vastly, vastly overrated by the fantasy community, and he's not. I would take at first base, honestly, I would take Trey Mancini over him. I would take Seth Brown over him. I would take Ryan Mountcastle over him. I would take any of the prospects probably over him, even if the prospects don't come up, because to me, he's a net negative if you're playing him at first.
Yeah, well said. No, I don't disagree with anything you said. It was it was just interesting study for me. I wanted to see. I knew you'd have a good perspective on it.
It's even in real life, it's fascinating to me that he fetched what he did. It really, really is, because he's like your modern day empty 300 hitter, and he's a minus defensively, despite the fact that he's played a bunch of positions. He's not even a break-even player at any of those positions. So I don't know. It's not to say I'm not a Luis Ariz hater. I just think fantasy wise, he doesn't carry much of any value. If he's the last guy off my bench and he's got multi-position eligibility, then cool, I'll plug him in once in a while. But yeah, no, not in the top 16 at all, not even close. All right, let me breathe, get a glass of water. We'll come back and see if we can't have more heated conversation or impassioned conversation about the players.
There you go.
We'll be right back. Tier 3. Let's get started.
Yeah, so my tier 3, as I said, is a glut of players. This is my last tier. I had 13 players after Abreu that were between $13 and $18 on my sheet. So I really clustered up, really picking nits, try to separate them. But for me, the player who was clearly my next one was Anthony Rizzo. Mm-hmm. The thing that is really dragging down his value is his projected batting average of 233. His launch angle last year was 19.3%, which is getting pretty high, pretty extreme fly ball. So we know fly balls, right, equal lower batting average. And looking at his track record the last 3 years, his batting average has been low, but I look at his contact rates and his whiff rates, and other than his chase rate, I don't see anything in the plate approach that foretells a really poor batting average, and his walk rate is still 10.5. And so, yeah, I love, in the upper 82 percentile barrel rate, the ISO above 200, 25 home runs, on that team, good walk rate. And again, I just don't think he's a true talent 233 hitter. I think he had at the end of his time in Chicago, he wasn't himself. He's kind of rejuvenated. I just think he's better than that. And that's really the only thing that's keeping him from being in the tiers above. It drives him down to this level. So I think he's the value here. He's my number 7.
So I think he's a part of this tier for me too. I have him at 11. But I think that historically I've seen, and I agree with the points that you've made, but I think that he goes back and forth between selling out for power and trying to hit for average, right? And because he didn't always have a 19.3-degree launch angle. If I look real quickly, his launch angle has historically been slightly lower. So 19, it was 12.6, 16.7 in 20, 14.8 in 21, and then 19.3 is the highest it's ever been. But that said, I do think he is a value. I do think that the other thing to point out with Rizzo is hold on here. So he also, and I know he didn't hit that many ground balls, 33%, which is a very low ground ball rate, but he's a 48.1% pull hitter last year. And as many have stated, the left-handed pull hitters are the ones who are going to benefit most from the new shift rules. So I think that also could impact his average quite a bit, or not quite a bit, maybe 10, 20 points. But it puts him in that elevates him quite a bit. To me, the right-handed comp of Rizzo is actually Rhys Hoskins, another high power, low average player, both of whom are kind of in that 75 to 85 run and RBI range, 30 home run range, hit somewhere next year, probably between 235 and 255. They both walk at a 10.5% rate. Hoskins does strike out more. Their zone contact is pretty similar. Their swinging strike is off by 0.1%. Similar players, both have really, really kind of high launch angle. Rhys Hoskins was 18.1 degrees. So similar players, both in very good home run parks for their swing, both of whom play in very, very good offenses, right? So again, as I said earlier, I think that I tend to clump players together in terms of their skill set. And I see Rizzo and Hoskins as very similar players numerically. I give Hoskins the nod because I think that the Phillies have a more well-rounded offense, which means to me higher potential for runs and RBIs for him. I also give him the nod because he's 29 and Rizzo's 32. So Hoskins popping a career year next year is not out of the question at 30 years old. Whereas I think it's much less likely that Rizzo does it at 33. But I don't think that there's that much separating those two players, and I expect them to be very, very similar to one another next year. I think you can win a championship with one of those two players as your first baseman.
I think that's a good comparison. I have Hoskins at 9, and I have Josh Bell between them. And yeah, I think as you said, like clustering together makes sense. I wonder if I should flip Bell and Hoskins to have it be Rizzo, Hoskins, Bell, because Bell really offers you something different. As you said, the Hoskins projection, the batting average is almost identical to Rizzo, and the big difference is the strikeout rate. And I think that's why I tend to value Hoskins a little bit less. But you're right. I mean, at the end of the day, his ISO and his production is actually a little bit better than Rizzo, even though he strikes out a tick more. Which is a blind spot for me. I tend to just, without checking myself, bypass players based on that.
It's funny because I don't love that profile, right? I think that they both are going to provide, you know, many fewer hits. So our league is hits, not average. And I think it'll provide both of those players provide fewer hits than I want from a first baseman. They give you the power you're looking for. They put you at a little bit of a deficit in runs and RBIs compared to the elite players. And they're not sexy, right? It's not the up and coming dude. It's not Guerrero. It's not Pasquantino. But I think that you can win it again. I think if you're elite at other positions, I do think that you can win a championship with one of those two guys as your first baseman. That's the question. I guess I should have said previously. That's the question I ask myself, right? When I'm thinking about who my starting first baseman is going to be at any position, but especially a big production position like this, I ask myself as I get lower in the rankings, is this a player I can win a championship with? And if
Right.
the answer is no, I need to figure out how to get there.
I
So
think the other thing I should have mentioned with Rizzo is similar to Freeman. You
mhm,
know, he's the only player in this cluster for me who I think you can count on for 6 to 8 steals, which
mhm.
in like head to head in our home league doesn't really amount to much, but I think in a roto league does matter.
Sure, sure. I agree.
And it's not because he's fast, he's just like a crafty son of a bitch.
Right, smart.
Yeah.
There are three other players that I think are worth mentioning. Two of which are in the same tier with Hoskins and Rizzo for me, but are of similar profile and I think are worth comparing. My 8 was Hoskins, my 9 was CJ Cron, first baseman for Colorado, 32 years old. I don't want to like CJ Cron. I never have. I didn't like him as an Angel. I don't like him now. He's just not a player he's a player I look to actually to downgrade or trash because I don't like him. But that said, he hits in Colorado, and his last 2 years, he's hit 28 and 29 home runs, scored 70 and 79 runs, and driven in 92 and 102 RBIs. And then his OPS in the last 2 years, in 21, it was 905. Last year it was down to 783, but in 2020, even in Detroit, it was an 894 OPS. So I think Cron is a player that you can't ignore. He's boring. He probably gets quite a bump from playing in Colorado, but you can't ignore the production. And I think that if you were a big CJ Cron fan and you wanted to try to justify him at the bottom of tier 2, I think you could probably come close to doing that if you really, really, truly wanted to. One thing with him, watch for any trade that may happen, any rumor of a trade that may happen with CJ Cron going outside of Coors. Last year, his away or his home slash line, triple slash last year was 302, 354, 955 in Coors. His triple slash away from Coors was 214, 279, 619. He was a 619 OPS guy on the road, right? So that's something to watch for. His contract ends at the end of 23. They have two first basemen that they drafted in the first round in the minor leagues. And I think this is his last year in Colorado. So he's kind of a don't touch in dynasty and get the most out of him that you can in redraft if you happen to choose CJ Cron. But again, 29 home runs, 102 RBIs last year is nothing to sneeze at. The one deficiency that I see is a 6.8% walk rate and a 25.9% K rate. So not a beautiful player, but I think worthy of being in this tier. Another kind of power over hit sort of first baseman. Another one like that is Rowdy Tellez. I actually have Tellez at 15. I was shocked to see that he had 599 plate appearances. I think of him as a strong side platoon first base DH player, but he actually did have quite a few at bats against lefties. Again, can't ignore 35 home runs and 89 RBIs. He did hit 219, but his BABIP was 215, which is obnoxiously low. And I think part of that
He is one of the slowest players in baseball.
he is. but his launch angle wasn't horrible. It was 15.3 degrees. And he
Right.
didn't hit a ton of balls in the air, comparatively speaking, 45.5%. But that's not so egregious that you would expect such a low BABIP. So I don't know if he's a true 219 hitter. He's probably more of a true 240 hitter to me. So if he's 240 with 35 home runs again, and he happened to drives in another 6 runs or so, right? You're talking about a 240, 35 home run, 95 to 100 RBI player. So I group those guys, even though I put Tellez at 15, I group those guys in a as a similar style of player. The other one I want to add to that group is Spencer Torkelson. I ranked him 10th. He's actually a part of the cluster with Hoskins, Cron, Torkelson, and Rizzo. I know his numbers last year weren't phenomenal, but to me, I see the hard hit. I see him as a great hit, as a talented hitter, right? He was the best college hitter of the last 10 years when he came out and was drafted 1-1. There are a lot of signs that he is going to start to hit. He doesn't strike out at an egregious clip. His average exit velocity was 90.5 miles an hour. Launch angle is 15 degrees, which you look for. The other thing worth mentioning with Torkelson is that he also has a 1-to-1 ground ball to fly ball ratio, which I look for as well. But the interesting part is that Detroit is moving their fences in center field about 10 feet, and they're lowering the fences across the entire outfield to be at, I believe it's 7 or 8 feet. So they're trying to become a more hitter neutral park. I think most parks are trying to become more hitter neutral, to be honest with you. But to me, that is a big deal for a player like Torkelson. I read that it wouldn't have increased his home runs that much, I think by 2 or 3, the fence move, but he's also just 23 years old. So I'm betting on his talent in the same way that I'm betting on Pasquantino's talent. I think that the skills are there. I think that the talent is there. And at some point in time, from my own evaluations, I tend to focus on the true talent of the player, even if the numbers or the results haven't shown up yet. And for me, Torkelson at 10 is a bet on that. I would rather have him above any of the players I have below. You have more players in this tier, correct?
Yes.
So who are the other first basemen in this tier?
Like I said, it's a big tier for me. So we talked about Rizzo and Hoskins. We did not talk about Bell. Bell was my 9, and then from then on down, I have more than 6 players. I had Lowe, Mountcastle, Pasquantino, France, Vaughn, Walker, Tellez, Baum, Diaz, and then Cron.
Okay. Anybody of interest there for you?
I think on Cron, I think you did a good job of detailing from a roto perspective. You just close your eyes and look at what he accrues. He does. I've drank the poison water, as we all do. We read and things over the off season, and I read multiple times how his production away from home is just been pretty devastating.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can manage your roster where you don't have him in, when he's away from home, that you can pair him with someone else and get great production.
It's
Or you
brutal to
can,
do that.
in a roto league, you just close your eyes when he's, don't pay attention.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, as you said, production is production.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think Josh Bell at 9 for me is he's in this tier. He's one of the guys that has the best plate skills. His WRC plus is 124. Which is only second to Yandy Diaz, which is driven by Yandy's walk and strikeouts, not by anything he does in terms of power or production at the plate. But Bell is kind of a mercurial player, kind of up and down, kind of streaky, going to the Guardians. His launch angle is less than optimal, but again, his plate skills, his contact skills, and then he does have a 34 home run season in his career. So, going to a park in Cleveland that's not as hitter friendly as Washington, but not as penal as San Diego, or Pittsburgh for that matter. I just think he's a player I see as kind of a max volume switch hitter for the Guardians. We've seen what guys like I almost said Andre Simmons. That's not the right player. Ahmad Rosario is done there.
Sure.
Getting max playing volume. Even though he's, I think honestly probably not nearly that. I don't saying that Bell is that's not a talent comp or hitter comp, but just someone who goes there as sort of a medium fantasy value, and then just due to volume becomes more relevant.
Sure.
I'm just really interested to see what Bell does. I'm not super high, or else I have him higher, but I do think of this group, he stands out as kind of a unique skill set. Projected 78 OPS, 19 home runs, 72, 74. Again, double digit walk rate. I think those are pretty safe floor, and I think he could do more than that potentially.
Mm-hmm. I like Bell. He's an interesting player to me. I like it. So in this tier, I look for a player who where their floor, right? I think Josh Bell's season last season is pretty much his floor. 266, 362, 784, 17 home runs, 78 runs, 71 RBIs. I don't expect anything less than that from him. But I think there is, because he popped a 37 home run season in 2019, I think there is obviously more power potential there. He also is playing for a very good offensive team in Cleveland, which I think is interesting as well. So is it out of the realm of possibilities for him to get to 25 home runs and have 90 runs and 90 RBIs? I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility at all. And that starts to put him probably at the top of this tier, and even potentially close a little bit closer to kind of the Abreu's of tier 2. So I like to find a player who has a predictable floor, but still has some upside. And I think Bell does have that upside for me. Again, we talked about it in the catcher pod a little bit. I love that 12.5% walk rate coupled with the 15.8% K rate is makes him very, very safe. If nothing else, say they hit him 2, right? If nothing else, he's getting on base and he's going to score runs. So Josh Bell even though he's 29, he's got a little bit of an up arrow for me, given not just team context, but also the fact that he's had a history of being able to hit for a lot more power in the past. Who was another one you want to talk about?
So Lowe and Mountcastle, I don't really necessarily want to talk about. I think Lowe, I'm just scared that he popped a really good season.
Mm-hmm.
And he hasn't closed the hole in his swing that he had in Tampa.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone is really, really high on him. I have him at 10 just based on what he's projected to do, and I'm not impassioned about it. I don't necessarily want to spend time on him. I think at 13 and 14, France and Vaughn are interesting to me. And two players, I think, France is only 28. I don't want to make it sound like he's over the hill, but he's in his late 20s, whereas Vaughn, I think, is a player we've kind of been waiting on. But I kind of see them looking at their projections and looking at their skills. They're very similar. They're both guys in the 80th percentile in whiff rate. Both make, well above average contact, 94 and 87 percentile. Both of them don't chase. Both of them have a sub 20% K rate, but also low walk rates. And they're probably going to hit, between 18 and 20 home runs. So they don't give you that power, but I think both of them are middle order of the bats. Both of them could potentially help you in batting average. And to your point about, betting on like Torkelson or Pasquantino, Vaughn, there might be more power, right? There might be more power than he's shown. You could bet on the pedigree.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you want demonstrated track record, France might be the way to go. But I think I see them as very similar type, middle of the order, help you with average, good solid hitters, good plate approach, don't walk very much, but also don't strike out a ton. And then after them, Walker and Tellez, again, pairing up players, both Christian Walker and Rowdy Tellez. You talked about Rowdy, power players, good walk rates, low 20s K rates, don't, no speed, so 25, 26, 27 home runs, and potentially max volume playing time down there at the bottom of this group. So I'll stop there.
I used to love Andrew Vaughn. I think Andrew Vaughn was a top 3 dynasty keeper for me. I thought the power was going to come. I'm all the way out on Andrew Vaughn at this point. Launch angle went down by 2.2 degrees last year, which I should say what we wanted to see from him was his launch angle go up, right? He was 9.7 degree launch angle last year. Hit too many ground ball. He has a 44% ground ball rate 2 years ago. and it went down to 7.5 degrees in 22, and his ground ball rate went up, right? So he's trending, in terms of the one skill we wanted to see from him, he's trending in the wrong direction. He hits the ball hard for sure, 91 average 91 miles an hour, but his walk rate also went down. So it went from 8.7%, which is below average, to 5.6%. So he's now a high contact, high ground ball hitter, right? Which is not what I look for in a power player.
Right.
I thought that he was I thought he was the type of player that would learn and tweak his swing and learn how to hit with a little bit more loft. I'm not looking for, him to try to yank everything out to left field like a Simeon or a Justin Turner, but just to have a little bit more line drive in his repertoire would be enough for me. But I'm all the way out on Vaughn. I don't know if it happens this year. That's great. He is only 25, going into his age 25 season. I did really like him in the past, but he is not a player that I'm going to seek out whatsoever in 2023. I'll let someone else take that chance. He is off of my top 16. Ty France, I have at 16. Same profile, right? 5.7% walk rate last year. Doesn't strike out, but he chases a ton, almost 36%. His zone contact is 92.9%, which was tops in my top 16 for first baseman. But what that means to me, if he's chasing 36% of the time, but he makes contact in the zone 93% of the time, that says to me that he's probably making weaker contact than most players, right? He's putting too many balls in play, and he needs to be more selective if he wants to be a better player. And that plays out in his 87.6 mile an hour average exit velocity. He gets a lot of base hits out of it, but it's not, again, to me, if we're talking about can a first baseman help you win a championship, France and Vaughn are not those guys, right? I'm starting to draw that line where I'm like, no longer can these guys be a starting first baseman on my team and help me win a championship. Bell, I think, is borderline. Nathaniel Lowe, I haven't touched on yet. I don't like him. I had to discern between whether I don't like him as a player or if my bias in hating the Rangers was coming into play. And I see the 27 home runs. I see the 302 average. I see the 851 OPS. The glaring number on his stat line to me is a 363 BABIP. So if you expect regression from him, and then, so I'll walk through the exercise. So when I see a really high BABIP, the first thing I do is I look at some of the other skills to see if he has the type of skill set or the type of results that would lead to a higher BABIP, meaning a lot of hard hit ground balls, right? Spraying the ball everywhere as opposed to being a total pull guy. So he had a 48.1% ground ball rate, which is high, not egregiously high, but he also hit the ball up the middle more than he pulled it. So he's spraying the ball everywhere. That spraying the ball everywhere in that way does portend to a higher BABIP, as does a higher ground ball rate. But 363 is still a lot higher than what I think of as a normal BABIP for even a power player. I don't see him hitting 300 again. If he hits 25 home runs next year, so be it. I don't believe in the talent. I know he was a highly ranked prospect at one point in time. He also had an 11.1% swinging strike rate, which was the second highest of my top 16 first basemen. For me, he's a stay away. Even though I have him at 12. I think if I was to re-rank this, I might slide Bell above him, but that's mostly preference. I have one player left in my top 16. So I went 8 Hoskins, 9 Cron, 10 Torkelson, 11 Rizzo, then another tier, which is 12 Lowe, 13 Bell. And then at 14, I have Tristan Casas, the top prospect for the Boston Red Sox. I think the Red Sox they might be a bottom 2 team in the NL East this year. I think this year is a developmental year for them, especially with the Trevor Story injury. And so it behooves them to give a player like Casas 600 plate appearances. Even if he's not a great player out of the gates for the Red Sox, I think he's going to accumulate a ton of counting stats just by playing. as much as he does. He's also, one thing to think about with him and why I put him in the Bell low tier is he's more of a hitter than a slugger. He's 6'4", 252, right?
Right.
Hulking figure, but he's a better hitter than he is a slugger. I don't think we're looking at a 35, 40 home run hitter. I think it's closer, if he does reach his potential, 25 to 30, maybe popping 135 home run season. But he's a 280, 290 guy, and he's going to walk a lot as well. I would be willing to entertain even elevating him slightly because I think the talent is there. But for now, conservatively, I have him at 14, and then 15 and 16 are for me are Tellez and France. Then the guys I have listed as just outside of my top 16, I do 16 because we're in a 16-team league. So these are the starters for me. Ryan Mountcastle, who, let me bring it up here, I believe has a sub 80% zone contact rate. So there are a lot of things about Mountcastle that I liked. When I saw that, I kind of couldn't keep him on this list. Let me see here.
What's
Last
just to me
season,
is his home runs, he went from 35 to 22, and he's projected for 24. But I see that being driven by that season he had 2 years ago. And with the change in park dimensions in Baltimore, I just question, you know,
it was
if he's going to hit more than 22 to 23 home runs.
it was strictly a ballpark change that caused his numbers to shift. So check this out. I found this fascinating. 144 games in 21, 145 games in 22, 586 plate appearances in 21, 609 in 22. That's a 23 plate appearance difference, okay? 33 home runs in 21, 22 last year. Here's the crazy part. 7.0% walk rate in 21, 7.1% walk rate in 22, 27.5% K rate in 21, 25.3 in 22. BABIP went from 297 to 303, average 255 in 21, 250 in 22, OBP 309 in 21, 305 in 22. And then the craziest one is, so slugging in 21 was 487. Slugging in 22 was 423. So that's a reduction of 64 points in slugging. So everything else was in line, right? His walk rate, his K rate, his number of at-bats, even his average in OBP were all the same over the course of the last 2 years. But he lost 64 points in slug and 11 home runs. To me, that is 100% a product of the fences moving back. One thing I will say in his favor is that he is going into his age 26 season. So I think just based on age progression, we may see a bump in power. I also think that that offense is, we debated this last pod, but I think that offense is going to continue to get better and better very quickly. And so if he is not dropped past, say, 5 or 6 in that lineup, I think his counting stats could increase pretty quickly as well. He's still off of my top 16. So just outside him, Christian Walker, I think that you could justify Christian Walker being in the same category as Tellez and Rizzo and Cron and those guys. I don't see it. I just didn't see the history of it. Seth Brown is here in part because he provided some steals as well, and I think he's going to get plenty of playing time in Oakland. Joy Meneses, I don't know what to make of him. He had a great season in limited time in Washington last year. A bit of a journeyman, lacking pedigree. I might take him if he's available late, but not a player that I'm going to kind of build around. And then I also have Trey Mancini on this list. He's had a history of producing. He's going to get playing time in Chicago. And then sleepers, I have Matt Mervis, first base prospect for the Cubs. I think he's actually going to start in AAA. He was a very exciting prospect before they signed Mancini. Kyle Manzardo, first base prospect for the Tampa Bay Rays. I think he's the most talented first base prospect in baseball, but I don't trust the Rays to give him a full season of plate appearances in the next couple of years. Ryan Noda, who was a Rule 5 pick by Oakland, has quite a bit of talent. I have him on that list. And then Michael Toglia, who is the former UCLA, first baseman, first round pick of the Colorado Rockies, who's a 3-2 outcome guy, but I think will also get time next year. So those are my sleepers. Anybody that you want to mention that are outside your top list or sleeper first baseman?
Yeah, I hope that no one outside of you is listening to this podcast, but I
Doesn't
really
matter,
think
even if they
Brandon,
are, who cares?
yeah, I think Brandon Belt is someone who I
Sure.
would love to have as my second first baseman
Sure.
on my roster for when they're playing right-handers and especially at home. His his ISO is projected to be 203. You look at his splits versus right-handers. We all know about his deteriorating knees. I
Mm-hmm.
see him exclusively being a DH for the Blue Jays,
Mm-hmm.
which is a top top three in batting war, top four in runs scored into game projection. So he's someone I would love to have as a bench option for first and utility,
Mm-hmm.
as I think as his knees allow him to play, I love that environment for him. And I love what he does as a hitter. He does strike out 26% of the time. He also walks 12% of the time. And I love the power from the left side.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else of note for you?
I don't think so. No.
All right. I'll give you the option. We can go over the differences in 6 minutes between Dynasty and Redraft. Or we can take a quick break, come back, do that, and then open some cards.
Let's knock it out in 6 minutes.
All right, sounds good. So the difference for me in Dynasty and Redraft at this position is that so my top six, I dropped Abreu from my top six, my top two tiers, because as everyone knows, Dynasty, we're talking about owning that player or rostering that player for their as long as you want to, as opposed to having to redraft. So it skews young. I think it's worth saying. It skews young, it skews talent, it skews upside. So Abreu is off that list. So I have a top six. My top three are Vladimir Guerrero Jr., Pete Alonso at 2, and then I have Vinny Pasquantino at 3. The next tier is Freddie Freeman at 4, Paul Goldschmidt at 5, Matt Olson at 6. I think that in hindsight, I may move Olson above Goldschmidt if I was to do it again because of a 6-year age difference, but that's what I have here. Did you do dynasty rankings, or what would you do differently? What would you do differently with your own rankings with your top six for dynasty?
No, I think what I was following along as you went through there. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Flipping those two, I think I would have Olson higher, much higher, along with Alonso.
Mm-hmm. And then I have a 7 through 11 tier, which is 5 first basemen. I've got Torkelson at 7, Casas at 8, Hoskins 9, Lowe 10, and then Abreu 11. If we consider Abreu to have 2 or 3 good years coming, I think that's worth it. And then the last tier for me was I have Kyle Manzardo at 12. I'm hoping he gets traded from the Rays because I think he's a really great hitter. I do have Vaughn at 13. Despite what I said about his lack of elevation and power, I do think he's a 290 to 300 hitter still. Josh Bell at 14. Josh Naylor at 15. I'm a believer in his skill, even if he does platoon a bit and gets 450 to 500 plate appearances. I think Naylor's worth it. And then at 16, Tyler Soderstrom, who is a catcher first base prospect for the Oakland A's. Big power. I don't think he's going to stick at catcher. And then outside of that of interest, I have Cron, I have Rizzo, I have Mountcastle, France, Tellez, the usual suspects, Christian Walker, Matt Mervis, Michael Toglia, like I had mentioned. The one that I haven't mentioned yet that I have on my just outside is Lazaro Montes, who is an 18-year-old Cuban prospect in the Seattle Mariners organization. I know this is big projection, 6'4", 6'5", left-handed, long levers, really pretty swing, and 70 grade power. He's in the top 40 of my top 100 prospect lists as well. but given that he's 18, I think is worth mentioning because of the talent, but probably not on anyone's radar as of yet. Any comments from you about dynasty ranks at first base? You're
No,
good?
sounds good.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Anything else? Anything you're looking forward to this week?
Let's see. This week, more episodes with you, and my forecaster should arrive next week.
Sweet.
Yeah, just keep grinding through.
Sweet. So we've got second base coming up on Wednesday. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Yes.
I don't really have anything else. It's about time to start watching some NFL playoff football and continue to crunch some numbers. And we'll be back on Wednesday with our second base redraft and a little bit of dynasty rankings as well. Cool, man.
Love it. All right.
All
Thank
right,
you.
brother. Enjoy the weekend.
Bye.